A small island nation, once nothing more than a cluster of foggy towns, stretches its influence across the entire globe. Red-coated soldiers, trading ships, and bureaucrats carve up continents, ruling over hundreds of millions. The British Empire, an empire so vast that the sun never set upon it, seemed unstoppable.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught, sullen peoples, half devil and half child.
And yet, within a few decades of the 20th century, this behemoth crumbled, leaving behind newly independent nations struggling to find their own paths. What happened? How did Britain, once the world's most powerful force, lose its grip on its vast territories? The answer lies in war, economics, resistance, and the undeniable tide of history. This is the story of the British Empire's decolonization, a tale of power, profit, and inevitable change. A prequel to Decline. To understand the fall, we must first understand the rise. The British Empire didn't emerge overnight. It was built piece by piece through trade, conquest, and sheer opportunism. It all began in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, with privateers and merchants, most notably the East India Company, seizing opportunities in India and beyond. By the 18th century, Britain had outmaneuvered rivals like France and Spain, becoming the dominant power in North America, the Caribbean, and the Indian subcontinent. The Industrial Revolution supercharged Britain's ability to expand. Steamships, railways, and advanced weaponry allowed the empire to maintain control over its vast territories, from Canada to Australia, Africa to Southeast Asia. But there was a fundamental issue. Ruling over these lands was expensive. The empire was never purely about spreading civilization. It was about resources, trade, and economic gain. When the costs began to outweigh the profits, the system started cracking. The first tremors of decolonization were felt long before the 20th century. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, was an early warning that Britain couldn't hold territories indefinitely, especially when those territories were economically and militarily strong enough to push back. The Irish struggle for independence in the 19th and early 20th centuries was another glaring sign that empire and oppression bred resistance. But the real tipping point came with the two world wars.
Through 5 years of total war, Winston Churchill has led our people to their greatest victory after some of the darkest hours in our history. Great issues still lie ahead, and at this time it is fitting that the British nation should listen once again to the words of Mr. Churchill.
5 years ago, I promised you blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And your untiring response brought us, in the end, victory over Germany. Today, we still have tears. Not so many, thank God. But the conquest of Japan, hand in hand with our American allies, is a formidable undertaking which we must and will see through to the end.
World War I weakened Britain significantly, but it was World War II that truly shattered its imperial dominance. Fighting Nazi Germany and Japan drained the British economy. By 1945, Britain was in massive debt to the United States. Its industries were exhausted, and its military stretched thin. Meanwhile, nationalist movements in colonies had grown stronger, emboldened by Britain's evident weaknesses. One of the first major blows came in 1947 when India, often called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, won its independence. Years of nationalist resistance, led by figures like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, combined with Britain's inability to maintain control, led to the partition of India and the creation of India and Pakistan. The division resulted in massive bloodshed and migration, setting a precedent for other colonies to demand their own freedom. Maintaining an empire isn't just about military power. it's about economics. While colonies provided raw materials, manpower, and trade benefits, they also required massive investments in administration, infrastructure, and military presence. By the mid-20th century, Britain's economy was in crisis. The cost of World War II, combined with the need to rebuild its own cities, made empire maintenance a burden rather than a benefit. Meanwhile, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerging as the two superpowers, pushed for decolonization. The US, despite its own history of imperialism, saw British colonies as potential economic markets and preferred self-governing allies over European-dominated territories. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, actively encouraged anti-colonial movements as part of its ideological battle against capitalism. Africa, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. The empire unravels. Following India's independence, the dominoes began to fall. In the 1950s and 1960s, African nations such as Ghana, 1957, Nigeria, 1960, and Kenya, 1963, gained independence often after brutal struggles against British rule. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising, led by figures like Dedan Kimathi, forced Britain to realize that suppressing revolts was both costly and morally indefensible. In the Middle East, Britain withdrew from Palestine in 1948, leading to the establishment of Israel in ongoing regional conflicts. Egypt, under the leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, challenging British influence in the region. A failed military intervention in the Suez Crisis, where Britain was forced to withdraw under US and Soviet pressure, proved that Britain could no longer act as a dominant world power without external support. The Caribbean and the Pacific followed suit, with nations such as Jamaica, 1962, and Fiji, 1970, gaining independence. In Malaya, modern Malaysia, a violent communist insurgency from 1948 to 1960 tested Britain's hold, but independence was granted peacefully in 1957. By the 1980s, the empire was little more than a collection of small island territories and dependencies. Unlike the violent decolonization struggles of France, Britain largely attempted to manage its retreat through negotiations. However, this process was not without conflict. Racial tensions, economic struggles, and political instability plagued many former colonies in the years following independence. Britain, despite withdrawing its direct control, often maintained influence through economic ties, military agreements, and the Commonwealth. By 1997, when Britain handed Hong Kong over to China, the last significant symbol of British imperial power was gone. What had taken centuries to build had unraveled in just a few decades. The British Empire's decolonization was not a singular event, but a long and complex process driven by war, economics, and the unstoppable force of self-determination. The empire that had once dominated a quarter of the world didn't fall because of a single revolution, but because of 1,000 revolts, a crumbling economy, and a shifting world order. Today, the legacy of empire still lingers in the form of political tensions, economic struggles, and cultural connections that span the globe. But one thing is clear: no empire, no matter how powerful, lasts forever. The British learned that lesson the hard way.